Naming and shaming people online to identify them for their suspected involvement in a criminal offence has become more and more prevalent and has become quite the debate, because people argue that images shouldn't be shared online because that's not fair, it's a breach of their privacy, breach of GDPR, etc. And other people argue, conversely, that it's perfectly fine because if they've committed an offence or they are likely to have committed an offence, then that's the only real way of identifying them these days. Let's say you've had a bike stolen or you're a restaurant and you've had someone rush out without paying the bill, but you have them on CCTV. How else are you to identify them and locate them and then bring them to justice? Because after all, if you only give the information, the photographs or whatever to the police, they might not find them because the police just can't be everywhere. And if you put it on social media, hundreds, if not thousands and hundreds of thousands of people might see it. Someone knows where they are and they can bring them to the police and bring them to justice. So this, if you haven't gathered, is an extension video to the Dine and Dash couple that have recently been sentenced to a prison term for multiple counts of fraud and theft. And so this is an enhanced discussion on the use of CCTV cameras. Now, as with many different things, is it legal is not an entirely straightforward question. And now in this case, is it legal to take CCTV imagery and post it online? Well, it depends. And there's differing views on this, as I say, and there's a fairly recent blog post from the ICO on this, which speaks specifically about how data protection law helps retailers to tackle shoplifting. Now, without reading it all in full, I will link it below. It does depend, because if you've captured somebody on CCTV that are involved in what you suspect to be a criminal offence, then this is criminal offence data. Now, criminal offence data, as opposed to the usual kind of data, is more specific, more sensitive, and therefore you should think more carefully before sharing it. Now, the standard test to process, which includes any kind of sharing, publishing, and giving it to somebody else, any kind of processing, you need to determine whether or not it is necessary and whether it is proportionate in the processing of that data. And that will determine whether it is appropriate to do so. So, for example, sharing something with the police is almost always going to be okay, because if you suspect someone of being involved in an offence, it is almost always okay to share that with the police. And then if they've been convicted of that offence, almost always it's going to be okay to share that photograph or whatever online, because it's a fact. It is a fact that this person has been convicted of said offence. Now, the ICO has a few views on sharing information like this. It says about sharing suspect details with the police. You can share criminal offence data with the police or other relevant law authorities to prevent, detect, or investigate crime. And information you give them could bring the criminal to justice and is likely necessary and proportionate. But then it becomes a little bit more complicated, because when they say sharing information with a manager of another store in the local area. So this has happened, and it's been reported in the news fairly recently, where a shop has had a spate of thefts or one serious theft. They've caught the person on camera and they've shared that image with local stores to say, watch out for this guy. Do you know this guy? Do you recognize this guy? Watch out for this guy, because this guy has stolen something from our store. Now, in my opinion, I very often support most of what the ICO publishes in its guidance, and this bit is no different. They say sharing information with the manager of another store in your shopping centre. It says this is likely to be appropriate as they are in the local area, they might have experienced similar issues, and they are able to share further information or help to prevent recurrences. Then it goes on to say sharing information with the security guards. This is likely to be appropriate because they are likely to come across the individual. Now, where I sort of slightly differ from the ICO in the views of whether this is reasonable or not. Now, you are entitled to your own view, and you can put that below as well in the comments section. And of course, this is not legal advice. This is just me giving you my view as a practitioner and as an objective assessment about sharing CCTV imagery. This goes on to say putting images in a staff room. Showing images of suspected shoplifters should be limited to what is needed only to necessary individuals, such as retail and security staff, via secure channels. This limits the audience to what is necessary and proportionate. Putting them up in staff room for all to see is less likely to be appropriate. You see, that's where I slightly disagree, because If you have CCTV imagery of someone that has quite clearly stolen something from your store, then if I owned the store, I would want all of my staff to be aware that this individual has been caught on CCTV stealing something. Because if you see them do it, you see them take it out of the store and they have stolen it, albeit they've not yet been convicted, which is really where this hangs, because it's likely to be criminal offence data if they are photographed in a suspected offence that's not yet been proven, then that is part of the problem. But if I owned that store, I would certainly want all my staff to be aware that that person has been caught on CCTV stealing something. Now, again, let me know what you think in the comments. But if I've employed, let's say, 10 or 15 staff that regularly work there, they do shifts and rotations, and this individual comes into the store, how are they going to know that that individual has previously been caught on CCTV stealing stuff from the shop unless they can look at the photograph? So I disagree with the first one, where it says this is less likely to be appropriate. It doesn't say that it's not appropriate to share that. It says it's less likely to be appropriate. Now, I think it's perfectly appropriate, but we read on. Then it says local businesses sharing images between each other via a social messaging platform, or just says messaging platform. If neighbouring retailers want to share images between one another, they should consider putting an agreement in place where they all agree to only use secure devices and activate auto-delete, etc. That's so that it's not retained for indefinite periods of time. But in doing so, they can share it. Now that again, I think is one step beyond putting it up in a staff room, for example. But here it doesn't say that that's less likely to be appropriate. So this is sharing with other businesses via, let's say, WhatsApp or any other kind of secure messaging platform. Then it goes on to say, publishing the information on social media groups open to any members of the public from the local area. Then it says you must only share personal information in a way that's proportionate and necessary to achieve your purpose, which is really where it comes on to how I'm going to suggest you make these decisions a little bit later in this video. It says sharing personal information so widely is likely to be excessive. I'll come back to that point a little bit later. Then it says putting images in the local area, such as shop windows and lampposts. You must only share personal information in a way that's proportionate and necessary to achieve the purpose. Sharing images in this way gives access to those who don't have the appropriate authority to see them or to take any action. Now, the whole argument there is that they should be shared with the police because the police have the authority to do something about it. But the problem there is the police probably don't know who they are. They might know who they are. There are some individuals in the community with whom the police are intimately familiar because they have a long list of previous convictions, such as is quite likely the case in the 2 Dine and Dash customers that were published on CCTV just recently in the video that I'm talking about, which I'll link below, and the police are probably quite familiar with them. And clearly by publishing that CCTV, they were found, they were prosecuted, and they've now been sentenced to prison. Now in a moment, I'm going to talk about my overall guidance for 2 separate points on whether or not you should be publishing CCTV imagery of those suspected of a crime. Now speaking of data security, there's another rather creepy story that I'd like to tell you that one of my viewers shared with me just recently, and what you might be able to do about this if this story freaks you out slightly. So my viewer wrote to me and said that they recently visited a restaurant and ate there, obviously, but when they left the restaurant, they got a message on their phone to review the restaurant next door, where they did not eat. Some kind of pizza parlor. Some of you may have experienced this before. Now, if you've actually visited the place and you leave and you get a message to review that place, that's one thing. But if you get a message to review the place next door, that then suggests that you are being tracked and traced either by that company or by someone else on your phone, and that can be rather creepy. Now, there's a more sinister side to all of this because many of these companies do store your data, which is why my solution to this is my partner for this channel, which is Imagery. Now, you might not know that many companies will store your data, your information, your tracking and your movement locations, and they share that on with other parties, who in turn sell it on to other people, and these are known as data brokers. The problem with that is that that might ultimately end up in nefarious third-party hands that then try to steal your identity, take out loans and contracts in your name, and all sorts of other things that you'd rather they didn't do. So Imagery is a service where you sign up and they contact all of these data brokers and marketers and insist that they remove your data from their systems in accordance with UK data protection law and US data protection law. They then have a set time frame frame within which that they must erase your data from their servers. If they don't, they are breaking the law, and there could be further consequences for them afterwards, such as heavy fines, and you might be able to bring a claim against them for breach of data protection. Because one of your rights under data protection law is the right of erasure. Now, in almost all circumstances, you are allowed to require that they remove and delete your data from their servers, save in some situations where you still have an ongoing contract or they're required to hold it by law and things like that. Everybody else must remove and erase your data. And as they're a partner to my channel, I can get you a huge discount off an annual plan of 60% with the link and the code in the description below. And it's a very straightforward sign-up service. You instruct them to contact all these companies to remove your data, and they do all of the work for you. They will then send you regular updates as to how many companies have complied, how many they are waiting to comply, and they pester them until they do comply and remove your data from their servers. So once again, check out the link in the description below. Make sure you use the coupon code to get that fantastic discount. And now, let's look at another story just like the one I've just described. So back to my explanation, and here is one story that illustrates my point perfectly. This was a group of shops, one of which had this man walk in and ask about printing costs, and waited for an opportunity where the store assistant was distracted. This is called distraction theft or distraction shoplifting. The moment the store assistant was distracted, the man picked up a tablet, an electronic tablet that was on the desk, put it in his jacket, and then disappeared. So, quite obviously annoyed by this, the shop then printed lots of posters of the image of this man that they'd captured on CCTV. They shared them with the local stores, who put them up in the window saying, "Thief, do you recognize this man?" And they posted them in the local area. Now, much to their annoyance, they were told off, essentially, by the police for sharing and posting these photographs of this man, because quite obviously they were quite annoyed about this. They wanted to identify the man and warn the other shops so that everyone was on guard. Now, after the police told off the shops for printing these posters and putting them up in the windows, the police did admit that this was misguided advice because they were their images and they were free to do with them what they wished. Although they would technically have to comply with data protection law, which comes back to this idea of justifying the necessary legitimate interest use of the CCTV imagery. Now, when it comes to publishing on social media, the ICO says information should only be made available to a limited number of people who need it to prevent and detect crimes, such as shoplifting. Wider public disclosures of information, such as posting it on an online retail-related social media platform, are less likely to be justifiable. Where retailers deem that sharing is necessary and proportionate, they must be aware that this will bring responsibilities around key data protection principles such as accuracy and retention. Because obviously if you publish it on social media, you lose any control over the retention because other people can screenshot it and share it onwards and onwards. The example the ICO give about this is about a train operator, where they say a public figure posts a video about overcrowding on those trains, which is likely to harm the reputation of the train provider. Then the train provider then seeks to release CCTV footage of the public figure to show in fact it's not overcrowded and it's just been exaggerated. Now in that case, to cut a long story short, they recommend that you obscure or blur out the faces and imagery of other people, save for the public figure that's complaining about the trains, because that is to correct a false impression. Now I would argue that if that is okay, i.e. publishing an image of the public figure complaining about the trains and you're proving them wrong, then surely it is okay to publish imagery of someone who is quite clearly committing an offence in your shop, albeit they may not yet have been convicted. But if the restaurant is sure that A, they've left without paying, or a shop is sure that the person is responsible for theft because they've clearly seen them take something off the shelves, put it in a bag, put it inside their coat and leave, then the shop will need to decide whether it's necessary and proportionate for the legitimate interest of identifying who they are. Now, the ICO appears to be taking the view that you shouldn't be publishing them for the sole purpose of finding out who they are, but all in all, this becomes a balancing test between the legitimate interests of the business for processing the data, which means publishing the imagery online, as against the individual's rights, interests, and freedoms. So whilst on the one hand they're in a public place, they don't have an automatic right to privacy, but if they are captured and there's an alleged offence against them, then that becomes criminal offence data, which is different than just your image, for example. Then they quite likely lose control over that data, and it might not be proportionate. And so that is why the ultimate conclusion in cases like this is it depends. If you, as a shop, a business owner or otherwise that's captured CCTV, and you make the decision that you're going to publish these images online just to identify the individuals and bring them to justice, then you need to justify doing so. So you would first need to consider other less intrusive ways of doing it so that you could share it with other members of staff, other shops in the local area, local forums in the area, and obviously the police. But if all of that fails and you simply cannot identify who they are, in my view, there is a very real and legitimate interest in the business to identify who these people are so that they can be questioned by the police. I would be careful not to outright accuse them of the crime. I would objectively state precisely what happened, much as the police do when they say, we would like to speak to this individual about an assault that happened. You'll notice that the police are not saying, this guy has assaulted somebody, please find him. The police, when they publish imagery, are saying, we would like to speak to this individual about something that happened. The police, quite equally, have taken the decision that it is necessary and proportionate to publish this imagery to try to find out who this individual is. You'll often find me reposting those things on X so that more people can see it and ultimately these people can be found. But it is also important to distinguish that that is the police that are publishing these imagery. They have the authority to investigate and, with the help of the CPS, to prosecute. Now, as an individual or as a business, you don't have that prosecutorial authority, at least not a statutory authority, but you can, as an individual or as a business, bring a private prosecution. So as a business, it is entirely possible that you might want to privately prosecute somebody and you need to identify them first. But it's all a balancing exercise. Now, I can only imagine that the individuals captured on the CCTV, if they really did steal something, they're not going to be forthcoming to say, I'm going to sue you for breach of data protection, because obviously they volunteer themselves. It'd be a bit like the burglar coming forward in red paint to say they've damaged my clothing whilst I was burgling their house. That's just not likely to happen. If they did come forward to sue you for breach of data protection, in my view, your defense would be that you've processed their data, as in you've published the imagery, as a legitimate means to identify who they are. Now, that is not a slam dunk argument. It's a balancing test, and on some occasions, the ICO is not going to agree that that's proportionate. I, for one, think that it should be, because if someone has been caught in the act on CCTV, then I think you should be able to publish those photographs so that you can find out who they are. As I said, it's one of these balancing exercises where it depends. But let me know your thoughts and comments in the box below. Make sure you subscribe, and as always, thank you for watching.